The highway is a narcotic. After 12 hours, the white lines strobe like a hypnotic pendulum, and the shadows in the periphery begin to dance. That's the long-haul commandment. When the road starts breathing, you pull over. I found a gravel turnout on a desolate stretch of mountain asphalt, miles from civilization. Thick fog choked the pines, swallowing the headlights as I killed the engine. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, pressing against the glass like deep water. I leaned the seat back, craving just 20 minutes of oblivion. I didn't get 20. I didn't even get 2. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was soft, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. I turned to the passenger window, expecting a state trooper. Instead, 2 small, hooded figures stood motionless in the mist, waiting.
Chapter 1: The Void in the Glass. The exhaustion wasn't just physical. It was a living thing, a parasite coiled around my brainstem. I had been driving for 14 hours straight, pushing a beat-up sedan across the jagged spine of the Cascades. The heater rattled, blowing air that smelled of dust and burning oil, but it was the only thing keeping the mountain chill at bay. Outside, the world had been reduced to a tunnel of high beams cutting through soup-thick fog. The pines were merely jagged shadows, looming like teeth in a predator's jaw. I knew the rule. Every long-haul driver knows the rule. When the white dashes on the asphalt start to look like Morse code from the dead, you pull over. You don't gamble with the mountain. I spotted a turnout, a patch of gravel barely wide enough for a semi, bordering a drop-off into absolute blackness. I guided the car in. The tires crunched loudly, the sound magnified by the oppressive silence of the altitude. I killed the engine. I killed the lights. Darkness rushed in like water filling a sinking ship. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the engine block tick as it cooled. Tick, tick, tick. It was the only sound in the world. No crickets, no wind howling through the firs, just a vacuum of silence that felt heavy, pressurized. I reclined the seat, pulling my jacket tight around my chest. I didn't lock the doors, a mistake born of fatigue, not trust. I closed my eyes, and the static of the road finally began to fade. I drifted. Then the sound. Knock. Knock. It wasn't a branch hitting the car. It wasn't the wind. It was distinct, rhythmic, bone against glass. I jolted awake, adrenaline spiking so hard my vision swam. My hand flew to the door handle, instinctively checking the lock I hadn't engaged. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. 3 a.m., remote highway. Who is out here? I turned my head slowly toward the passenger window. 2 figures stood there. The fog swirled around their ankles, but they were perfectly still. They were small, children, maybe 12 or 13 years old. They wore oversized hoodies, gray and nondescript, the hoods pulled low to shadow their faces. Logic tried to assert itself. Car trouble. They crashed nearby. They need help. But the lizard brain, the ancient part of my mind that spots tigers in the grass, was screaming, "Wrong. This is wrong." I hadn't heard footsteps.
The gravel was loose and deep. Walking on it should have sounded like crushing cereal. Yet they had appeared in total silence. I didn't roll the window down. I cracked it, barely an inch. The cold mountain air hissed into the cabin, biting my face. "Hey," I said, my voice cracking. "You kids okay?" The one on the left spoke,
"Sir, we need to use your phone." The voice stopped my breath. It was a boy's voice, pitch-wise, but it lacked cadence. It was flat, sterile. It sounded like a recording of a voice, stripped of all biological warmth. "We're lost," the second one added. Same monotone, same flat delivery. "Where are your parents?" I asked, gripping the steering wheel. "Is there a car?" "They're coming soon," the first one said. "But we need to call them. Let us in. It's cold." They weren't shivering. It was near freezing out there, breathless and icy. Yet they stood with their arms hanging limp at their sides. No huddled shoulders, no chattering teeth, just statues in the mist. "I can make a call for you," I offered, though I knew I had zero signal up here. "I'm not unlocking the door." "We need to come inside," the second one said, more insistent now. Not angry, just inevitable. "The phone won't work out here. We need to come inside." The air in the car plummeted. I could see my own breath now, pluming in the dim light of the dashboard clock. "Look, tell me where you came from," I said, leaning closer to the gap in the window, trying to peer under the hoods. "I can't help you if you don't." The first boy lifted his head. The breath died in my throat. The dashboard light caught his face. His skin was pale, almost translucent, like wax paper stretched over bone. But it was the eyes that shattered my reality. They were black. Not dark brown, not dilated pupils. They were solid, edge-to-edge obsidian. No sclera, no iris, just two wet, abysmal voids punched into a child's face. They didn't reflect the dashboard lights. They absorbed them. The second child looked up. Same eyes, two more holes in the world. A primal, sickening dread washed over me. It wasn't just fear, it was a biological rejection. My stomach turned. The hair on my arms stood up so rigid it hurt. I felt like prey. I felt like meat. "Let us in," they said in unison. The sound wasn't coming from their throats anymore. It felt like it was vibrating directly inside my skull. "No," I whispered. The first boy stepped closer. He didn't walk, he glided.
Instantly, a spider web of frost bloomed outward from his palm. The glass groaned under the thermal shock. "You have to let us in," the boy said. His expression hadn't changed. The black eyes were wide, unblinking, staring not at me, but into me. "We can't come in unless you ask." "Get away," I stammered. My hand fumbled for the ignition. "We are very hungry," the second one said. The key found the slot. I twisted it. The engine roared to life, shattering the silence. The headlights flared, illuminating the fog, and the two horrors standing inches from my glass. They didn't flinch at the light. They didn't squint. "If you don't let us in," the first boy said, his voice cutting through the engine noise as if he were sitting in the passenger seat, "we'll wait for next time." I slammed the gear shift into drive and stomped on the gas. The tires spun, spitting gravel before gripping the asphalt. The car fishtailed violently onto the highway. I didn't breathe until I was doing 80, the speedometer climbing. I risked a glance at the rearview mirror. They were standing in the middle of the road, two small gray silhouettes against the swirling red mist of my taillights. They weren't chasing, they were just watching. And then the fog swallowed them whole. I didn't stop for 300 miles. I drove until the sun came up, until the terror dulled into a jagged, throbbing paranoia. I told myself it was a hallucination, sleep deprivation, a trick of the light. Weeks passed. I tried to forget the voids in their eyes. I tried to forget the frost on the glass. I took a new route, avoiding the Cascades entirely, sticking to the flat, arid stretches of the Nevada basin.
It was a Tuesday, another long haul, another night pushing the limits of endurance. I was crossing an expanse of desert highway, miles from the nearest town. The fatigue hit me again, familiar and heavy. I checked the mirrors, nothing but darkness. It was a hallucination, I told myself. You're fine. Just rest for 10 minutes. I pulled onto a wide shoulder, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. I turned off the engine. The desert silence was different than the mountains. It was vast, dry, and empty. I leaned back, closing my eyes, gripping a tire iron I now kept in the passenger seat, just to be safe, just for peace of mind. Silence. 1 minute passed. 2. My breathing slowed.
My grip on the iron loosened. Knock. Knock. My eyes snapped open. The sound was identical. The same soft, controlled rhythm. The same bone-on-glass resonance. I turned my head to the window, my blood turning to ice water. A silhouette stood there, backlit by the indifferent moon. A small hood, a motionless posture. And then a voice, muffled by the glass, but clear enough to stop my heart. You promised next time.
Chapter 2: The Mark of the Trespasser. You promised next time. The voice didn't just pass through the glass. It seemed to originate from the air inside the cab, a whisper directly into my auditory nerve. It was dry, dusty, and sounded like crumbling parchment. I didn't look. I couldn't. My neck muscles locked up, paralyzed by a cocktail of adrenaline and pure reptilian terror. This was Nevada. This was the high desert. I was 3 states and 2 weeks away from the misty mountain pass where I'd first seen them. Distance was supposed to be the cure. Distance was supposed to mean safety. But the knock came again. Knock, knock. It was insistent now. Not aggressive, never aggressive. That was the worst part. A frantic pounding I could understand. That's human desperation. This was patient. This was the knock of someone who knows you're home and knows you have nowhere else to go. My hand spasmed toward the ignition, but my eyes betrayed me. They flicked to the side mirror. He was there. The same gray hoodie, the same slight frame. He stood by the rear passenger door this time, his head cocked at an unnatural angle, like a bird studying a worm. The desert moon was bright, casting long, sharp shadows across the gravel. But the boy cast no shadow at all. I twisted the key. The engine sputtered. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. The starter whined, re, but the combustion didn't catch. Please, sir, the voice drifted in again, muffled by the steel and glass but perfectly audible. It's very dark out here. We don't have a ride. I pumped the gas pedal, my breath coming in ragged, hyperventilating gasps. Come on, you piece of junk, I hissed. The boy moved. He didn't walk. The motion was a glitch in reality. 1 second he was by the rear door. The next he was pressing his face against the driver's side window, inches from mine. I recoiled, slamming my back against the passenger seat, scrambling to put distance between us. The glass was the only thing separating me from him. Through the grime of the window, I saw the face clearly. Pale, poreless skin that looked like it had never seen the sun. And those eyes, the void. Up close, they were even worse. They weren't just black. They were absorbing the light around them. Looking into them felt like vertigo, like leaning over the edge of a skyscraper. There was no soul in there, no consciousness I could recognize. Just a hunger, a bottomless, starving vacuum. He raised a hand.
His fingers were long, too long, the joints swollen and arthritic looking for a child. He tapped the glass. Click. The sound of the automatic lock disengaging echoed like a gunshot in the silent cab. I froze. I hadn't touched the button. The lock pin on the door panel popped up. "Thank you," the boy said, his voice devoid of gratitude. His hand moved to the handle. A scream tore out of my throat, raw and primal. I threw myself across the center console, kicking the dashboard, flailing, jamming the key again with desperate force. The engine roared to life. I didn't check the gear. I didn't check the road. I slammed the shifter into drive and floored it. The tires shrieked, spinning on the loose gravel before biting into the pavement. The car lurched forward, fishtailing violently. I gripped the wheel with white-knuckle force, correcting the skid, and shot out onto the highway. I didn't look back, not this time. I kept the speedometer buried past 90, the desert scrub blurring into a tunnel of gray speed. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, thump, 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 mimicking the knock that was still echoing in my ears. I checked the door lock. It was down, locked. Had I imagined it popping up? Had the fear hallucinated the sound of the mechanism? I drove for 2 hours without blinking. My eyes burned, dry and gritty, but I refused to close them. Every shadow that stretched across the headlights looked like a small hooded figure. Every rattle of the suspension sounded like a soft voice asking for permission. Civilization. I needed lights. I needed people. I needed the banal, ugly reality of a 24-hour truck stop. I saw the neon glow of a big stop sign around 4:30 a.m. It was an oasis of fluorescent light in the middle of the black wasteland. Semi-trucks were lined up like sleeping beasts, their engines idling in a low, comforting rumble. I pulled in, parking directly under a floodlight. The harsh sodium glare washed over the hood of my car, stripping away the shadows. I sat there for a long time, hands shaking on the wheel, waiting for the knock. It didn't come. Slowly, painfully, I uncurled my fingers from the leather. I opened the door and stepped out. The air was cool, smelling of diesel and old grease. It was the best thing I'd ever smelled. I walked around the car, needing to inspect it, needing to prove to myself that nothing had touched it. The driver's side door was clean, dust-streaked, bug-splattered.
I moved to the passenger side. My knees almost buckled. On the rear window, right where the boy had stood before glitching to the front, there was a mark. It wasn't frost this time. The desert air was too dry for that. It was a residue, a greasy black smear in the shape of a small handprint. It looked like soot, or maybe oil, but it had an iridescent sheen to it, like a spill on wet pavement. I reached out to touch it, then recoiled. The metal of the doorframe around the print was warped, subtle but visible. The steel rippled slightly, as if it had been exposed to intense heat or immense pressure. "Hey buddy, you okay?" I jumped, spinning around. A trucker stood a few feet away, holding a thermos. He was a mountain of a man, bearded and wearing a flannel vest. He looked concerned. Yeah, I stammered, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Just thought I hit something. The trucker squinted at my car, then at me. "You look like you saw a ghost, son. You been driving long?" "Too long," I whispered. "Get some coffee," he grunted, nodding toward the diner. "The road gets weird at night. Best not to let it into your head." If only you knew, I thought. It's not in my head. It's on my window. I went inside. The diner was an explosion of Americana, checkered floors, red vinyl stools, the smell of bacon and burnt coffee. I sat in a booth with a clear view of my car. I ordered black coffee and stared out the window. I watched the black handprint under the floodlight. I wanted to go out there and scrub it off, but I was terrified that if I touched it,
The stain wouldn't come off my skin. I took a sip of the scalding coffee, letting the pain ground me. They found me. The thoughts circled my mind like a vulture. They found me in a different state. They opened my lock. "We need to come inside." That's what they had said. The lore, I had looked it up on my phone a week after the first encounter, in a motel room with all the lights on. The black-eyed children, PEKs. Urban legends, the internet said, creepypasta. But the forums were full of stories. People who opened the door, people who let them use the phone. The stories never ended well. They usually ended with the posters stopping their updates or talking about illness, bad luck, a slow, creeping decay of their life. But I hadn't let them in. The lock, my mind whispered. The lock popped up. I pulled my keys out of my pocket and stared at the fob. The battery was new.
The mechanism was mechanical. It shouldn't have moved. Unless they don't need permission to unlock the door. They only need permission to enter. A chill swept through the diner that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The chatter of the few patrons seemed to dim. The clatter of silverware faded. I looked up at the window again. My car was there. The handprint was there. But inside the car, in the back seat, a small, dark shape was sitting upright. I blinked, rubbing my eyes hard. No. Impossible. I locked it. I have the keys. I looked again. The back seat was empty. Just my gym bag and a pile of old wrappers. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Paranoia, I told myself. Just paranoia. I threw a $10 bill on the table and stood up. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stay stationary. Being stopped felt like being a target. I had to keep moving. If I kept moving, they couldn't catch up. I walked back to the car, forcing myself to ignore the handprint. I got in, locked the doors immediately, and started the engine. As I backed out, my headlights swept across the edge of the parking lot, where the asphalt gave way to the desert scrub. Standing at the edge of the light, just beyond the reach of the high beams, were 3 figures. 2 small ones, and a third one, taller, lanky, wearing a long, tattered coat. They weren't looking at the diner. They were looking right at me. And as I drove past, accelerating on the on-ramp, my phone lit up in the passenger seat. I glanced at it. No signal. No service. But there was a new voicemail. I didn't play it. I couldn't. But the notification on the screen didn't display a number. It just displayed 2 words, glowing bright and hateful in the dark cabin. Let us in.
Chapter 3: The Frequency of Static. The phone sat on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. I was doing 95 on the interstate, putting as much asphalt between myself and that diner as the engine could handle. The sun was beginning to bleed over the horizon, a bruised purple light that did nothing to warm the chill in my marrow. My eyes kept darting to the screen. The notification pulse was slow, rhythmic. Blink, blink,
blink. It matched the tempo of the knocking. I knew I shouldn't listen to it. Every horror movie logic dictated that you destroy the artifact, burn the tape, bury the cursed object. But curiosity is a disease, and fear is its fever. I needed to know if they were real. If the voicemail was just static, I could convince myself I was having a breakdown. I could check myself into a clinic, take some pills, and sleep for a week. But if it was a voice... I waited until the desert gave way to the outskirts of the city. Traffic thickened. The presence of other cars, normal cars, with normal drivers drinking coffee and listening to morning talk radio, gave me a fragile sense of armor. I hit play. The speaker didn't crackle with static. It was crystal clear. At first, it was just the sound of wind, high, whistling wind, like air rushing through a cracked window at high speed. Then, a sound that made my hands spasm on the steering wheel. Tick, tick, tick. The sound of cooling metal. My engine. They had recorded the silence before the knock. Then, the voice. It wasn't the flat monotone of the children this time. It was a chaotic, layered distortion, like a radio scanning through dead channels. "Invited," a woman's voice whispered. "Hungry," a deep guttural growl cut in. "Open," a child's giggle. And then all the voices snapped together into that singular dual-tone harmony I had heard outside the glass. "We know where you sleep." I hurled the phone into the backseat. It hit the floor mats with a dull thud, but the silence that followed was heavier than the noise. "We know where you sleep." I didn't go to my apartment immediately. I drove in circles around the city block, checking the mirrors, checking the alleys. I was looking for the gray hoodies. I was looking for the tall figure in the tattered coat. My building was a 6-story brick structure with a heavy iron security gate and a keypad entry. It was supposed to be a fortress. Today, it looked like a trap. I parked the car in the underground garage.
The fluorescent lights hummed, flickering in that seizure-inducing way that cheap tubes do. I got out and walked around to the passenger side. I needed to see the handprint again. I needed to know if the daylight would wash it away. It hadn't. Under the harsh garage lights, the mark was even more terrifying. It wasn't soot. The paint itself was blistered, the clear coat peeled back as if touched by acid. The metal underneath was discolored, turning a sickly, iridescent oil-slick blue. It was a brand, a cattle brand on my chassis. I grabbed my bag and ran for the elevator, my keys bristling between my knuckles like shanks. Inside my apartment, the air was stale. I locked the deadbolt. I engaged the chain. I wedged a heavy dining chair under the handle. Safe. The word felt hollow. I moved through the rooms, turning on every light. Kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, closet. I checked under the bed like a terrified toddler. Nothing. Just dust bunnies and old shoes. I went to the window. I lived on the 4th floor. Too high for anyone to climb. Too high for tapping on the glass. I collapsed onto the sofa, the exhaustion finally crashing over me like a tidal wave. My body felt heavy, leaden. I stared at the television, not turning it on, just watching my own reflection in the black screen. I must have dozed off. I woke up to the sound of the television. It was on, volume maxed out. Static. White noise roared through the apartment, a blizzard of sound that sent me scrambling off the couch, heart hammering. I fumbled for the remote, but it was sitting on the coffee table, untouched. I grabbed it and mashed the power button. The TV stayed on. The static swirled, black and white ants warring on the screen. Then, the pattern changed. The static didn't clear, but it organized. Shapes formed in the chaos. 2 smaller blobs of darkness.
one taller, looming shape behind them. I yanked the power cord from the wall. The screen went black. The silence rushed back in, ringing in my ears. My breathing was a jagged rasp. Electrical surge, I told myself. Short circuit. It happens. I turned to go to the kitchen, needing water, needing a knife, needing something. Knock. 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 I froze. It wasn't the TV. It wasn't the window. It was the front door. The heavy, solid wood door that led to the hallway. The hallway that required a key fob to access. The hallway that was monitored by cameras. Knock. 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 Sir? The voice was muffled. Polite.
Sir, we need to use your bathroom. My blood ran cold. The absurdity of the request made it worse. It was a mimicry of human need, a skin suit of normalcy draped over something predatory. I backed away, retreating into the kitchen. I grabbed the largest chef knife from the block. The handle was slick in my sweating palm. "Go away," I screamed. "I'm calling the police." "The phones don't work, sir," the voice replied. It was closer now, pressing against the wood. "You know they don't work. Just let us in. It will only take a minute." "I have a gun," I lied. "We don't mind," the second voice said. The girl, the other boy, it sounded identical to the first. "We just need to come inside. The hallway is very bright. It hurts our eyes." I crept toward the door, not to open it, but to the peephole. I had to see. I had to know if they were really there or if my mind was finally snapping. I pressed my eye to the brass lens. The hallway was distorted by the fisheye glass. The beige walls curved unnaturally. The carpet looked like a tongue. Standing on my welcome mat were the two children. They weren't looking at the door. They were looking up at the peephole. They knew I was there. Their heads were tilted back, exposing those terrible, light-eating eyes. The skin around their eyes was veined with black, like rot spreading through fruit. Their mouths were set in tight, straight lines. But it was what stood behind them that stopped my heart. The third figure. He was tall, too tall. He had to be hunching to avoid scraping the hallway ceiling. He wore a long, tattered duster that looked like it was made of shadows and old leather. A wide-brimmed hat obscured his face, but I could see his hands hanging at his sides. They were pale, skeletal, and the fingers were impossibly long, ending in black nails that looked like obsidian daggers. He wasn't knocking. He was just waiting. "Let us in," the children said in unison. And then the tall man moved. He didn't step forward. He raised one of those long skeletal hands and placed a single finger against the door, right over the deadbolt. I heard the metal inside the mechanism groan. Click. The deadbolt turned. I watched it happen. I watched the thumb turn on my side of the door rotate slowly, grinding against the friction, unlocked by a force that shouldn't exist. "No," I whispered. The chain was still on, and the chair. The door handle turned. The door pushed open a crack.
"You're making this difficult," the tall man spoke for the first time. His voice wasn't like the children's. It didn't sound flat or recorded. It sounded like grinding stones. It sounded like the earth splitting open. It was deep, resonant, and filled with an ancient, weary malice. "We have traveled a very long way," the tall man rasped, "and we are invited." "I didn't invite you," I screamed, backing up until my spine hit the kitchen counter. "You listened," the tall man said. "You listened to the message. You accepted the connection." The door pushed harder. The wood groaned. The chair legs scraped across the floorboards, screeching. The brass chain pulled taut, the screws beginning to pull out of the frame. Drywall dust puffed into the air. They were strong, impossibly strong. I looked around the apartment. 4th floor, no fire escape. The only exit was the door they were currently dismantling. I was trapped in the box I had built to keep myself safe. The gap in the door widened. Through the crack, I saw a sliver of the tall man's face beneath the hat. There were no eyes, just smooth, pale skin where sockets should have been. "Open the door," the tall man commanded. And for 1 second, my hand twitched. My body wanted to obey. The command bypassed my brain and went straight to the nerve endings. Open it, let them in, end the fear. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste copper. The pain snapped me back. No. I ran to the bedroom and slammed the door, locking it. A flimsy interior lock. It wouldn't hold them for 5 seconds. I grabbed the heavy dresser and dragged it across the floor, my muscles screaming, and shoved it against the door. From the living room, I heard the snap of the security chain breaking. I heard the chair clatter to the floor, and then the soft, rhythmic footsteps of small shoes on hardwood. Tap, 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 and the heavier, dragging sound of the tall man's boots. They were inside.
Chapter 4: The Thinnest Veil. The silence that followed the breach of my front door was worse than the noise of the chain snapping. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that fills a funeral home before the casket is closed. I was pressed against the far wall of my bedroom, a chef's knife trembling in a hand slick with sweat. The heavy oak dresser was wedged against the door, a pathetic barricade against entities that had just walked through a deadbolt like it was made of wet clay. Tap, tap, tap. Footsteps. Inside my living room. Inside my sanctuary. They weren't rushing. They were exploring. I heard the distinct sound of a finger tracing the textured wallpaper in the hallway, a dry, rasping zzz. Now, move the furniture. The command hit me with the force of a physical blow. My arms twitched, the muscles in my shoulders contracting, urging me toward the dresser. My body wanted to obey. It was a biological imperative, like the urge to vomit or the need to gasp for air. Move the furniture. Let them in. No! I bit my lip until blood filled my mouth, using the sharp pain to anchor my mind. I scrambled backward, away from the door, toward the window. The doorknob turned. The lock mechanism clicked, defeated instantly. The door pushed inward. The heavy oak dresser, fully loaded with clothes, shouldn't have budged. It weighed 200 pounds. But it slid across the hardwood floor with a screeching protest, pushed by a slow, inexorable force. An inch. 2 inches. Through the widening crack, darkness spilled in. Not shadow, actual darkness. A thick, viscous gloom that seemed to eat the light from my lamp. I didn't wait to see the eyes again. I couldn't survive seeing them again. I spun to the window. 4th floor, a 50-foot drop to the concrete alleyway below. No fire escape, just a narrow brick ledge, maybe 6 inches wide, running beneath the window frame to the neighbor's balcony about 8 feet away. It was suicide. But behind me, the dresser screeched again, louder this time. A pale hand, the fingers impossibly long and multi-jointed, curled around the edge of the doorframe. The wood blackened and smoked where the skin touched it. I threw the window sash up. The night air rushed in, cold and smelling of city exhaust, but it felt like freedom compared to the stagnant rot filling my apartment. I swung a leg over the sill.
Don't go, the children's voices sang out, a terrifying choir of two. It's a long way down. I didn't look back. I forced my body out onto the ledge, my fingers clawing at the brickwork. The wind whipped at my clothes. I was suspended over the abyss, my toes barely finding purchase on the crumbling mortar. I shuffled sideways, pressing my face against the rough brick, refusing to look down at the alley or back into my bedroom. Scrape. Scrape. From inside my room, the dresser toppled over with a crash that shook the wall I was clinging to. He's leaving, the boy said. His voice was right at the window now. I risked a glance to my left, toward the balcony, 5 feet to go. I felt a coldness on my right hand, the one gripping the window frame I had just exited. I looked. A hand was resting on mine.
It was small, child-sized. The skin was grayish-white, pulled tight over the knuckles. But the grip, it was like being clamped in a vise of frozen iron. The cold burned instantly, sending shock waves of pain up my forearm. "Let go!" I shrieked, thrashing my arm. The boy was leaning out the window. His hood had fallen back. His hair was wispy and thin, revealing a scalp that looked bruised. And those eyes, those twin black holes, were inches from my face. He wasn't angry. He wasn't straining. He was just holding me. "You can't run," he whispered. "We are the static in the line. We are the miles between the cities." I kicked out, my boot connecting with the brick wall, driving myself away from the window. My hand tore free from his grip, leaving behind a patch of skin that felt frostbitten and numb. I lost my balance. For a second, I was falling backward into the void. My left hand flailed, fingers hooking desperately onto the wrought iron railing of the neighbor's balcony. My shoulder wrenched with a sickening pop, but I held on. I swung, legs dangling over the empty air, gasping in agony. I hauled myself up, adrenaline overriding the pain, and tumbled over the railing onto the concrete floor of the neighbor's balcony. I scrambled to my feet and looked back at my apartment window. The boy was still there. He hadn't tried to follow. He was just watching, his hands resting on the sill. Behind him, looming in the darkness of my bedroom, was the tall man. The wide-brimmed hat brushed the top of the window frame. The tall man raised a hand and waved, a slow, mocking gesture. "See you soon." I smashed the glass of my neighbor's sliding door with the hilt of the knife I had somehow kept gripped in my hand. The alarm started blaring instantly, a piercing, rhythmic siren. Good. I wanted noise. I wanted cops. I wanted the entire world to wake up. I ran through the stranger's apartment, ignoring the confused shouting of a man waking up in the bedroom. I unlocked his front door and burst into the hallway, sprinting for the stairway. I didn't take the elevator. I took the stairs 3 at a time, nearly falling, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I burst out into the lobby, past a stunned night security guard who was looking up from his phone. "Call the police," I screamed at him, not stopping. "Call them now." I hit the cool night air of the street and didn't stop running. I ran until my lungs burned, until the blocks blurred together.
I found my car parked in the garage where I'd left it. Or had I? No. I had parked it on the street this time. I couldn't remember. My mind was fracturing. There, under a streetlight, my sedan. I fumbled with the keys, my frostbitten hand clumsy and stiff. I got the door open and threw myself inside, locking it instantly. I started the engine. The dashboard lit up, casting a comforting amber glow. I checked the back seat. Empty. I checked the passenger seat. Empty. But as I pulled away from the curb, tires screeching, I looked at the digital clock on the dash. It was blinking. 03 a.m. It had been 5 a.m. when I got home. The sun had been coming up. I looked out the windshield. The sky was pitch black. The streetlights were dim. The city was asleep. Time had moved backward, or I had lost hours.
or the sun had simply refused to rise for me. I drove toward the interstate. I had to keep moving. The boys said they were the miles between the cities. If that was true, the road was their territory. But if I stopped, they found me. I was trapped in a paradox of motion. To survive, I had to drive, but driving took me deeper into their world. I merged onto the highway, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror. My phone, which I had retrieved from the floorboard of the car where I'd thrown it earlier. Wait. I froze. I had thrown the phone in the back seat of the car before I went up to the apartment. I hadn't brought it inside. So how had they played the voicemail? I looked at the passenger seat. My phone was sitting there. But it wasn't my phone. It was an old, heavy rotary handset. The cord had been cut, the copper wires frayed and dangling. And it was ringing.
Chapter 5: The Frequency of the Dead. The rotary phone sat on the passenger seat, a heavy Bakelite tumor in the dim cabin. It was an object out of time, a relic of a decade I hadn't lived through. Yet there it was, solid, dusty, and severing the silence with a shrill mechanical shriek. Ring, 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 ring. The sound was deafening in the confined space. It wasn't digital. It was the physical clatter of a metal striker hitting brass bells, a sound that vibrated through the upholstery and into my thigh. I stared at the frayed cord dangling off the edge of the seat. It ended in a mess of copper wire and stripped insulation, swinging uselessly with the motion of the car. It wasn't plugged into anything. It wasn't connected to a network. It was screaming from the void. "Stop it," I hissed, my voice trembling. I reached out with my left hand, my good hand, to grab the handset and hurl it into the back seat, or better yet, out the window. As my fingers brushed the cold plastic receiver, the car swerved. The steering wheel jerked violently to the right, as if an invisible hand had seized the rim. I slammed on the brakes, correcting the drift just before the tires kissed the gravel shoulder. The car fishtailed, rubber screaming against the asphalt, before straightening out. My heart hammered against my ribs. The message was clear. Don't touch it. Ring, ring. The ringing grew louder. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was pressure. My ears popped. A migraine bloomed behind my eyes, a sharp stabbing spike of pain that synced with the rhythm of the bells. I was doing 80 miles an hour through a landscape that had ceased to make sense. The city lights were gone, swallowed by a darkness that felt thicker than night. The headlights cut a cone through the gloom, revealing only the endless hypnotic dash of the center line. I couldn't stop. If I stopped, the tall man would be there. If I stopped, the children would be at the glass. Ring, ring. What do you want? I screamed at the dashboard. The ringing stopped mid-cycle. The silence that followed was worse. It was the silence of a held breath. Then the speakerphone. Wait, rotary phones don't have speakerphones. Yet the voice didn't come from the handset. It emanated from the receiver as it sat in the cradle, amplified, filling the car like noxious gas. You are driving in circles, little vessel. It was the tall man. His voice was a landslide of gravel and old bones. I'm leaving, I said. My grip on the wheel white-knuckled. I'm driving until the sun comes up. You can't follow me forever. A dry, rattling sound filled the cabin. It took a moment to realize he was laughing. The sun? The voice rasped. Look at the clock. I risked a glance at the dashboard. 3 a.m. I had been driving for at least an hour since escaping the apartment. The clock hadn't moved. The colon between the numbers wasn't blinking. Time had suffered a cardiac arrest. We are the miles between the cities, the voice continued.
You are in our throat now. There is no sunrise here. Go to hell, I whispered. We have been, the tall man replied. It was cold there too. Pick up the receiver. No. Pick up the receiver or we will take the wheel again. The steering wheel twitched in my hands, a warning spasm. The car lurched toward the center divider. With a cry of frustration and terror, I snatched the handset off the cradle. I held it to my ear, the cold plastic feeling slimy like dead skin. I'm listening, I choked out. Good, the voice said. It was clearer now, intimate, as if he were sitting in the back seat, leaning forward to whisper directly into my auditory canal. You have a passenger. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a halt in the middle of the empty highway. I whipped my head around to the back seat. Empty. Just the shadows of the headrests and the dark void of the rear window. Don't lie to me, I shouted into the phone. Look closer, the voice purred. Look at your hand. I looked down at my right hand, the one the boy had grabbed on the window ledge. The numbness had turned into a burning ache. In the glow of the dashboard lights, I saw the skin was no longer just pale. It was black. Not bruised, black, like the eyes of the children. The discoloration started at the wrist and had spread down to the knuckles, consuming the skin in a matte, light-absorbing stain. The veins stood out like ridges of charcoal. I tried to flex my fingers. They moved sluggishly, stiff and foreign. You touched the threshold, the tall man whispered. You carry the infection. We are not in the back seat, driver. We are in you. I dropped the phone. It clattered into the footwell. I stared at my hand, revulsion rising in my throat like bile. I rubbed it frantically against my jeans, trying to wipe the blackness off, scratching until I felt the sting of raw skin. But the color went deep. It was the pigment of the meat itself.
I needed to cut it off. The thought was sudden and lucid. I need to cut it off before it spreads to my heart. I looked at the glove compartment. I kept a multi-tool in there. I reached for the latch. Knock. Soft, controlled, on the windshield. I froze. The sound came from the glass directly in front of my face. I looked up. Sitting on the hood of the car, staring through the windshield, was the girl. We were doing 0 miles per hour. The car was idling in the middle of the highway. She was cross-legged, her hoodie pulled up, her hands resting on her knees. The wind of the open road didn't ruffle her clothes. She was anchored to the metal. She leaned forward. Her face was inches from the glass. The headlights reflected off nothing in her eyes, just 2 infinite tunnels into the dark. She mouthed 3 words. I couldn't hear them, but I felt them vibrate in the roots of my teeth. Drive us home. Where? I screamed, slamming my hands against the steering wheel. Where is home? She pointed. She raised a pale gray finger and pointed straight ahead, into the fog. I looked past her. The fog was thinning. Through the mist, shapes were emerging. Not trees, not mountains. Houses. I was on a highway, but the scenery had changed. The guardrails were gone. The asphalt had narrowed. I was driving through a suburb. But it was wrong. The houses were all identical. Every single one was a gray 2-story box with a single window in the center, like a cyclops eye. There were no driveways, no mailboxes, no streetlights. Just rows and rows of silent gray houses stretching into the dark. Drive, the voice from the floorboard commanded. My foot found the gas pedal. I didn't want to press it, but my leg moved on its own. The black stain on my hand pulsed, and my muscles obeyed the infection. The car rolled forward. The girl on the hood didn't slide off. She remained perfectly still, a hood ornament of dread. We passed the first row at houses. They were empty, no lights, no cars. Then I saw the people.
standing on the lawns, standing on the porches. They weren't moving. They were facing the road. As my headlight swept over them, I saw their faces. They were all children, hundreds of them. Hoodies, pajamas, t-shirts, all gray, all standing with their heads bowed. As my car approached, they all lifted their heads in unison. A sea of black eyes flashed in the darkness.
Almost there, the phone whispered from the floor. My blackened hand gripped the shifter. I tried to pull it into reverse. I tried to back away from this nightmare suburb. But the shifter wouldn't move. It was welded into drive. The car accelerated. The houses blurred. The road ended. Ahead, looming over the gray rooftops, was a structure that made no sense. It looked like a school, but twisted. The architecture was non-Euclidean, angles jutting out that hurt the eyes to look at. A massive clock tower rose from the center, but the face of the clock was blank. No numbers, no hands, just a smooth, white circle. The girl on the hood pointed at the double doors of the building. They were open, and inside, waiting in the doorway, was the tall man. He was holding something. I squinted as the car rolled closer, unable to stop. He was holding a gas can, and in his other hand, a match. The engine is warm, the phone whispered, but the house is cold.
Chapter 6: The Arson of Sanity. The car rolled to a halt. It didn't shudder or jerk. It simply ceased to be a machine of motion and became a cage of steel and glass. We were parked on the circular drive of the twisted school, the gravel beneath the tires as gray and lifeless as the sky above. The girl on the hood slid off. Her movement was fluid, like mercury pouring from a jar. She landed silently on the dead grass and turned to face me, her black eyes wide and expectant. I was hyperventilating, the air in the cabin tasting of recycled fear and the sharp chemical tang of ozone. My right hand, the black necrotic claw that used to be mine, throbbed in sync with the idling engine. Outside, the tall man loomed. He was impossibly tall, his silhouette stretching up toward the blank white face of the clock tower. Up close, the tattered duster he wore wasn't leather. It looked like layers of dried, flaking skin stitched together with black thread. Beneath the brim of his hat, the pale expanse of his eyeless face caught the weak light of the suburb. He raised the red gas can. "No," I whispered, fumbling for the door handle with my good left hand. It was locked. The lock pin was down, smooth and unyielding. The tall man tilted the can. Liquid splashed over the windshield. It wasn't the amber hue of gasoline. It was thick, black, and viscous. It hit the glass with a heavy slap, running down in sluggish rivulets, obscuring the view of the gray school. The smell hit me a second later, penetrating the ventilation system. It didn't smell like fuel. It smelled like deep earth, like the bottom of a grave that had been flooded for a century. "Open the door," I screamed, slamming my shoulder against the B-pillar. "Let me out." The tall man set the can down. The metal clanked against the pavement, a lonely sound in the quiet world. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a matchbook. Not a lighter, a cheap cardboard matchbook. He struck one. The flare was blindingly bright in the monochrome gloom, a tiny dancing star of orange fire. He didn't throw it at the car. He held it up, letting the flame lick at his pale, long fingers. He didn't flinch. He didn't burn. "The vessel is compromised," the tall man said. His voice bypassed my ears and resonated in the hollow of my chest. He flicked the match. It tumbled through the air in slow motion, turning end over end. Panic, primal and explosive.
Seized me. I didn't think. I reacted. I grabbed the multi-tool from the passenger seat, where I had dropped it earlier, and flipped out the glass breaker nub. I swung with everything I had. Crack! The side window shattered. It didn't crumble into safety glass pebbles. It broke into jagged, razor-sharp shards like plate glass. The match hit the hood. Whoosh! The black sludge ignited instantly, but it didn't burn with heat. It burned with cold. A wall of silent blue-white flame roared up the windshield. The glass didn't melt. It frosted over, cracking under the thermal shock of absolute zero. The metal of the hood groaned and warped, shrinking inward. I scrambled through the broken window, dragging my body over the jagged glass. Shards sliced into my ribs and my legs, but I didn't feel it. The adrenaline was a narcotic. I tumbled onto the gray gravel, gasping for air. The cold coming off the burning car was intense. It sucked the warmth right out of my skin, making my teeth chatter instantly. The car was being consumed by a freezing fire, turning white and brittle, disintegrating into dust rather than ash. I scrambled to my feet and backed away. The tall man watched the fire. He seemed mesmerized by it. Beyond him, on the manicured lawns of the gray houses, the army of children stood watching. Hundreds of them. They formed a perimeter, a silent audience to my immolation. "Run," the girl whispered. She was standing right next to me. I hadn't heard her move. I spun around. She was smiling that terrible toothy smile. "Run, driver. The game is boring if you don't run." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted. I didn't run toward the school. That place radiated a malice so thick it felt like gravity. I ran toward the houses. I needed cover. I needed a wall to put my back against. My boots pounded on the asphalt of the suburban street. Slap, slap, slap. I risked a glance over my shoulder. They weren't chasing me. The tall man was still standing by the freezing pyre of my car. The children hadn't moved a muscle. They were just turning their heads, tracking me like a field of sunflowers following a dark sun. I reached the first house on the left, a 2-story colonial, painted the color of a bruise. I ran up the porch steps and threw myself against the front door. It swung open, unlocked. I stumbled inside and slammed it shut, throwing the deadbolt. I backed away, chest heaving, waiting for the inevitable knock.
But the silence inside the house was different. It was total. I looked around. The interior was empty. No furniture, no carpet, just bare subflooring and drywall. But it wasn't unfinished. It was conceptual. The walls were painted with crude, childlike drawings of furniture. A black outline of a sofa on the living room wall, a stick figure television, a crayon rug drawn on the floorboards. It was a stage set designed by someone who had had a home described to them, but had never seen one. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the hollow shell. No answer. I looked at my hand. The black stain had moved past my wrist. It was creeping up my forearm, a network of dark veins reaching for my elbow. The numbness was spreading with it. My fingers felt like dead wood. I tried to make a fist, but the hand only twitched. "It's taking me over," I realized with a sick lurch of my stomach. I'm turning into one of them. I needed a weapon, a real weapon. The multi-tool was gone, lost in the escape. I walked into the kitchen. Drawn on the wall was a refrigerator. Drawn on the counter was a sink. But sitting on the counter, real and three-dimensional, was a knife block. It was identical to the one in my apartment. The same wood, the same brand. I reached for the chef's knife with my good hand. As I pulled it out, the phone began to ring. It wasn't a cell phone. It wasn't a rotary phone this time. It was the wall itself. The drywall vibrated. The studs rattled. The sound came from the structure of the house, a low-frequency hum that built into a deafening, ringing tone. Ring. I covered my ears, dropping the knife. It clattered to the floor. "Pick up," a voice said. It came from the air vent on the floor. "Pick up the house, driver." I backed away, stumbling into the living room. "There is no phone," I screamed. "Stop it." "The house is the receiver," the voice boomed. It was the tall man again, and we are on the line. Suddenly, the front door, the one I had just bolted, dissolved. It didn't break down. It didn't open. It simply turned into mist and drifted away, leaving the frame empty. Standing in the doorway was the boy from the first night, the one who had asked for the phone. He stepped across the threshold. "You left your car," he said, his voice devoid of judgment. "That was against the rules. You have to finish the ride." "I'm not going back," I gasped, backing toward the stairs. "I'm not getting in that thing."
"You don't need the car anymore," the boy said. He raised his hand. It was black, just like mine. "You are becoming the vehicle." He pointed at my right arm. I looked down. The blackness surged. In the span of a second, it shot up from my elbow to my shoulder. The cold rushed into my chest, seizing my lungs. I fell to my knees, gasping, clutching my chest. It felt like I had swallowed a block of ice. "The upgrade is almost complete," the boy said, walking closer. "Do you want to see what you look like now?" He pointed to the wall. Where there had been a drawing of a mirror, the drywall shimmered and turned into actual reflective glass. I didn't want to look. God, I didn't want to look. But the infection commanded my muscles. My neck craned upward, my eyes locked onto the reflection. My face was pale, drained of blood. My skin looked waxy and thick. But my eyes were still human, brown, terrified, bloodshot. "Not yet," the boy whispered, standing right beside me now. He smelled of ozone and old dust. "The eyes are the last to go. They hold the scream." He reached out and touched my black hand with his. The connection was electric. A jolt of pure, freezing energy slammed into me. "The tall man is waiting upstairs," the boy said. "He wants to show you the map." "What map?" I wheezed. "The map of the highways," the boy said. "The map of all the places where the tired people stop." He gestured to the stairs. "Go up, or we will let the others in." He pointed to the open doorway. Outside, on the lawn, the hundreds of children took one synchronized step toward the house. Thud. The ground shook. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the banister with my good hand. I had no choice. The horde was outside. The monster was upstairs. I began to climb.
Chapter 7: The Atlas of Dead Ends. The stairs were unfinished, bare pine planks that creaked under my weight like breaking bones. The house smelled of drywall dust and ozone, a scent that clung to the back of my throat, metallic and sharp. My right arm hung useless at my side, a dead limb grafted onto a living body. The black infection had passed my shoulder, sending tendrils of ice into my neck and chest. With every beat of my heart, I felt the cold pump further into my system. It wasn't just numbness anymore. It was a heavy, leaden weight, pulling me down toward the earth. Behind me at the bottom of the stairs, the boy stood motionless. He wasn't following. He was the gatekeeper, ensuring there was no retreat. Outside, the silent army of children waited on the lawn, their collective gaze pressing against the walls of the house like deep water. I reached the landing. There was only one door. It was painted a deep, glossy black, contrasting sharply with the raw drywall of the hallway. It had no handle, no lock, just a smooth, uninterrupted surface. As I approached, the wood seemed to ripple, like oil on water. "Enter," the voice boomed from the other side. It wasn't loud, but it resonated in the hollow spaces of my skull. I didn't have to touch the door. It swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a room that defied the geometry of the house. It was vast. The ceiling stretched up into darkness, far higher than the roofline should allow. The walls were lined with shelves, thousands of them, stretching into the gloom. But instead of books, the shelves held jars. Glass jars, mason jars, pickling jars. And inside each one was a light. Some flickered weakly, like dying embers. Others burned with a frantic, terrified intensity. In the center of the room stood a massive table made of dark, polished wood, and behind it, the tall man. He had removed his hat. His head was bald, pale, and completely smooth. No ears, no nose, just a slit for a mouth, and those terrible, empty sockets where eyes should have been. He was studying a map spread across the table. "Come closer, vessel," he rasped, not looking up. His long skeletal fingers traced a line on the parchment. I stumbled forward, my legs trembling. The cold from my arm was making me sluggish, my thoughts thick and slow like freezing syrup. "What is this place?" I whispered. "This is the archive," the tall man said. He tapped a jar on the corner of the table. Inside, a tiny
Blue flames swirled in panic. Every time a driver stops where they shouldn't, every time a door is opened, every time a promise is made. He looked up. The empty sockets seemed to pull me in. "You are here because you listened." "I didn't open the door," I shouted, a sudden flare of anger cutting through the fear. "I drove away. I ran." "You listened to the message," the tall man corrected gently. "The voice carries the seed. The ear is a door, too." He gestured to the map. I looked down. It wasn't a standard road atlas. It was a chaotic web of black veins on white paper. But as I focused, I recognized the shapes. Interstate 80, Route 66, the Pacific Coast Highway. But superimposed over the familiar roads were other lines, red lines. They intersected the highways at random points, rest stops, turnouts, lonely stretches of desert asphalt. "The ley lines of exhaustion," the tall man murmured, "where the mind slips, where the barrier thins." He pointed to a specific intersection of black and red. "This is where we met." It was the turnout in the Cascades. He traced the line to another point, the desert highway in Nevada. "This is where you tried to hide." He traced it further, to a cluster of red knots. "And this is where you are now." The point he indicated wasn't on a map of the United States. It was in a blank void off the edge of the paper, a place that didn't exist. "Why are you showing me this?"
I asked, gripping the edge of the table with my good hand to stay upright. Because you are not just a passenger anymore, the tall man said. Look at your arm. I looked. The blackness had reached my throat. I could feel it constricting my windpipe, a cold hand squeezing the air from my lungs. The infection is a map, he continued. It writes the roads into your flesh. When it reaches your eyes, you become a guide. A guide? For the others. The lost ones. The hungry ones. He swept a hand toward the shelves of jars. They need drivers. They need vehicles to move between the spaces. Horror, cold, and absolute washed over me. They didn't want to kill me. They wanted to hollow me out. They wanted to turn me into a husk, a vessel to ferry their darkness across the world. No, I choked out. I won't do it. You have no choice, the tall man said. The process is all ready. Crash. The sound came from downstairs. Glass shattering. Wood splintering. The tall man's head snapped toward the door. For the first time, he looked.
Interference, he hissed. Another crash. Then a sound that didn't belong in this nightmare world. A car horn. Long, loud, angry. Hook! It was coming from outside. I seized the moment of distraction. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a large brass astrolabe sitting on the table, and swung it with my arm. It connected with the side of the tall man's head with a sickening crunch. He didn't fall, he didn't bleed, but he staggered back, his form flickering like a bad video signal. "Run!" a voice shouted from nowhere, everywhere. I didn't question it. I turned and sprinted for the door. I practically fell down the stairs, my bad arm banging uselessly against the railing. The boy at the bottom was gone. The front door was back? No, the front of the house was gone. The entire wall had been smashed inward. Parked in the living room, amidst a cloud of drywall dust and debris, was a semi-truck cab. It was massive, black, chrome glinting under the strange gray light. The grille was a terrifying maw of steel bars. The engine idled with a deep, earth-shaking rumble. The driver's door flew open. "Get in," a voice bellowed. I looked up. Sitting in the high driver's seat was the trucker from the diner, the big man with the beard and the flannel vest. He wasn't looking at me with concern this time. He was looking at me with frantic urgency. He was holding a shotgun across his lap. "Kid, move your ass!" I scrambled over the rubble of the porch, slipping on broken siding. I reached up, grabbing the handle of the truck with my left hand. The trucker reached down, grabbing my collar, and hauled me up into the cab. "Go, go, go!" I screamed, slamming the door. The trucker shifted gears, the transmission grinding a protest. He slammed his foot on the gas. The massive truck lurched backward, tearing through the remains of the house wall, crushing the porch supports. We roared out onto the lawn, tires churning up sod and gray earth. The army of children was there. They weren't standing still anymore. They were swarming. Hundreds of them, running with unnatural speed, their limbs blurring. They threw themselves at the truck, small fists hammered against the doors, pale faces pressed against the glass. Thump, thump, thump. "Hang on," the trucker shouted. He spun the wheel. The truck slew sideways, knocking a dozen of the gray figures aside like bowling pins.
He lined up the grill with the street and punched the throttle. The engine roared, a dragon waking up. We plowed through the crowd. I felt the sickening bumps as we drove over something. I closed my eyes. "Don't close 'em," the trucker yelled. "Keep your eyes open. If you close 'em, they get in." I forced my eyes open. We were tearing down the suburban street. The gray houses were blurring past. Behind us in the side mirror, I saw the tall man standing in the ruins of the house. He was growing, expanding. His shadow stretched out, chasing the truck, a wave of darkness eating the pavement. "Who are you?" I gasped, clutching the dashboard. Name's Miller, the trucker grunted, eyes glued to the road. Saw you at the diner. Saw the mark. Figured you didn't have long. You can see them? I've been driving these roads for 30 years, kid, Miller spat. You see a lot of things when you don't sleep. The black-eyed kids, they're the toll collectors, and you didn't pay. Where are we going? Out, Miller said grimly. We gotta cross the line before sunrise. If the sun catches us here, we're stuck forever. He pointed ahead. The road was ending. Not ending in a cul-de-sac, ending in a wall of fog. That's the barrier, Miller shouted over the roar of the engine. We gotta hit it at 80 or we bounce off. The speedometer climbed. 60, 70. The fog wall rushed toward us, solid and white. Brace yourself. I grabbed the panic handle. We hit the fog. It wasn't soft. It was like hitting water at high speed. The truck shuddered violently. The windshield cracked. The world went white. Then, silence. The engine noise cut out. The shaking stopped. I opened my eyes. We were stopped on the shoulder of a highway, a real highway. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, painting the desert sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Cars were passing us, real cars, a family sedan, a FedEx truck. I looked at Miller. He was slumped over the wheel, breathing heavily. We made it, he wheezed. I looked down at my right arm. The blackness was gone. My skin was pale, bruised, and covered in scratches, but it was my skin. The numbness was fading into a sharp pins and needles pain. I laughed, a hysterical, broken sound. We made it, I whispered. Miller sat up, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked at me, his eyes grave. We made it out, he said, but don't celebrate yet. He pointed to the windshield. In the bottom corner,
a tiny frost-white handprint. They marked the truck, Miller said quietly. Now they know my rig. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear in the big man's eyes. And they know you're with me.
Chapter 8, The Cabin Fever. The sun was up. It hung low and blinding over the eastern horizon, a searing white eye that should have burned away the nightmares. But inside the cab of the Peterbilt, the light offered no warmth. We were hammering down Interstate 80, the massive diesel engine roaring a steady, comforting baritone beneath our feet. The world outside looked painfully normal. A station wagon passed us on the left, a family inside, the kids arguing in the back seat. A billboard advertised world's best cherry pie at the next exit. But inside the rig, the air was freezing. I stared at the windshield. The frost handprint on the inside of the glass hadn't melted. The defroster was blasting hot air directly onto it, enough heat to warp plastic, but the white crystalline fingers remained perfectly defined. They were opaque, blocking a small patch of the highway view. It's not fading, I said, my voice hoarse. My throat felt like I'd swallowed razor blades. Miller didn't look at the print. His eyes were locked on the road, his knuckles white on the oversized steering wheel. He looked like a man trying to outrun a tsunami. It won't, Miller grunted. That's the claim check. They tagged the rig. You said we crossed the line, I argued, desperate for logic to reassert itself. We hit the fog. We're back in the real world. Look at the mile markers. Look at the sun. The sun is real, Miller said, shifting gears with a violent clank. The road is real, but the truck is compromised. You brought the static with you, kid. You acted like an antenna. He reached over and tapped the CB radio mounted to the dash. It was turned off, the dial dark. I haven't turned this on in 10 years, Miller said.
Not since my co-driver, Davin, went missing in New Mexico. But look at the needle. I leaned in. The signal strength needle on the dead radio was vibrating. It was bouncing rhythmically against the red zone. Thump, thump, thump. They're transmitting, Miller whispered. They aren't on the road anymore. They're in the frequency. I looked down at my right arm. The skin was pale, bruised from the window escape, but the black rot was gone. Yet the muscle memory of that cold grip lingered. I felt heavy, as if gravity inside the cab was stronger than outside. We need to ditch the truck, I said. Pull over. We'll hitchhike. We'll rent a car. Miller laughed, a dry, barking sound devoid of humor. Pull over? You stop this rig now.
And we're dead before the air brakes finish hissing. The only reason they haven't swarmed us is because we're doing 90. Velocity is the only shield we have left. He checked the side mirror, then the other. His eyes were darting nervously to the sleeper berth behind us. The sleeper cab was separated from the driver's seats by a heavy velvet curtain. It was drawn shut, a wall of dark red fabric. "What's wrong?" I asked, following his gaze. "I keep the bunk made," Miller said tightly. "Tight corners, military style. Nothing moves back there." So I heard the mattress springs squeak. A chill that had nothing to do with the AC washed over me. I stared at the red curtain. It swayed slightly with the motion of the truck, heavy and ominous. "Maybe it's just the road vibration," I offered weakly. "I know my rig," Miller snapped. "That wasn't the road. That was weight shifting." As if in response, the CB radio, still powered off, crackled to life. There was no static, no white noise, just a clear, high-pitched voice cutting through the roar of the engine. "Breaker 19 for the big rig. You've got a heavy load today, Miller." It was a child's voice, playful, mocking. Miller slammed his hand onto the power knob, twisting it. "Shut up." The radio didn't turn off. The voice continued, louder now. "You promised Davin you wouldn't stop, but you stopped for this one. Why is this one special, Miller?" "Don't listen to it," Miller shouted, his face reddening. "It's psychological. They try to make you crash." "We aren't outside this time," a second voice joined in, the girl. Her voice harmonized with the boys, creating that sickening, layered duality. The temperature in the cab plummeted. My breath began to mist in the air. The frost handprint on the windshield suddenly expanded, shooting out jagged fractals of ice that webbed across the glass, obscuring the driver's side view. Miller swore and activated the wipers. They scraped uselessly against the outside of the glass. The ice was inside. "I can't see," Miller yelled. He leaned forward, trying to peer through a small patch of clear glass near the dashboard. "Slow down," I screamed. "I can't. If I slow down, they materialize." He kept the pedal floored. We were blindly careening down the interstate, a 40-ton missile guided by a terrifyingly narrow field of vision. Then the sound came from behind us.
Zip. The sound of a zipper. Slow, deliberate. It came from the sleeper berth. I froze, my head turning slowly toward the red curtain. "Miller?" I whispered. "Did you zip anything back there?" "No," he gritted out, fighting the wheel as the truck began to drift. Zip. The sound of a duffel bag opening, or a body bag. Then, a small, pale hand slid through the gap in the velvet curtains. It wasn't reaching for us. It was just gripping the fabric, pulling it taut. The fingers were gray, the nails black. "They're in the bunk," I choked out. "Miller, they're in the bunk." "Take the wheel," Miller roared.
"What?" "Grab the damn wheel." He let go of the steering, reaching under his seat. I lunged across the center console, grabbing the rim of the massive wheel with my left hand, steering the truck as it hurtled down the highway. Miller pulled out a flare gun, an orange plastic emergency flare gun. "Open the curtain," he commanded. "Are you insane?" "Open it. I'm going to burn them out." "You'll burn the truck down. We're doing 90. "Better to burn than to be hollowed out," Miller screamed. "Do it." I didn't want to. Every instinct screamed against it. But the radio was laughing now, a cacophony of children's giggles mixing with the deep, grinding laughter of the tall man. The frost was closing in on the windshield, turning the day into a whiteout. I reached back with my shaking right hand. I grabbed the edge of the red velvet. The fabric was freezing cold. It felt stiff, like it had been dipped in liquid nitrogen. I yanked the curtain open. I expected to see the kids. I expected to see the doll man squeezed into the bunk. But there was no bunk. The space behind the curtain shouldn't have been there. It was a physics impossibility. Instead of a mattress and a mini fridge, I was looking into a long gray hallway. It stretched back for 50 feet, extending impossibly out the back of the truck cab, defying the length of the vehicle. It was the hallway of the gray house. And standing at the far end of that impossible corridor, way back in the darkness where the trailer should be, were the two children. They were holding hands, and between them stood a man. He was wearing a trucker's vest. His skin was gray, his jaw slack. "Davin," Miller whispered. The flare gun wavered in his hand. The gray figure raised its head. Its eyes were solid black voids. "Join us, Miller," the thing that used to be Davin said.
The children stepped forward. The hallway stretched as they moved, the perspective warping. They weren't walking. The floor was moving them toward us like a conveyor belt. "Close it!" Miller screamed, recovering his senses. He didn't fire. He dropped the flare gun and lunged past me, grabbing the curtains. He slammed them shut. But the cold didn't stop. The laughter didn't stop. And then the truck changed. The rumble of the diesel engine cut out. The vibration of the road vanished. The sensation of speed disappeared. Silence. Absolute, heavy silence. Outside the windshield, the sun blinked out. 1 second it was morning. The next, it was pitch black. The frost on the glass cleared instantly. I looked out. We weren't on the highway. We weren't moving. The truck was parked in a vast, flat expanse of gray dirt. The sky was a featureless charcoal void. No stars, no moon. And all around the truck, stretching to the horizon, were other vehicles. Semi-trucks, sedans, motorcycles, RVs, thousands of them. They were all parked in neat, silent roads. They were all rusted, covered in gray dust. "Where are we?" I whispered, the terror finally settling into a cold, numb acceptance. Miller slumped back in his seat. He looked defeated. He looked old. "We didn't beat the sunrise," he murmured. "We're in the lot." He pointed to the car parked next to us. It was my sedan, the one I had burned, the one that had disintegrated. It was sitting there, whole and pristine, covered in a layer of gray dust. And sitting in the driver's seat of my car was a figure. It was me. A gray, motionless version of me, staring straight ahead with black eyes. "We aren't the drivers anymore," Miller said, his voice breaking. "We're the cargo." A knock came from the driver's side door. Knock. Knock. Soft. Controlled. Miller didn't look. He just unlocked the door.
Chapter 9. The Junkyard of Souls. The click of the lock was the loudest sound in the universe. Miller didn't turn to look at me. His hand hovered over the door handle, trembling, his knuckles white against the dark plastic. He looked like a man who had just set down a heavy load after walking 1,000 miles. "Miller, don't," I whispered.
My voice was a dry rattle. "We can still fight. We have the flare gun." "There's nothing to fight, kid," Miller said softly. He stared out the window at the gray void. "The road ended miles ago. We're just parked." He pushed the door open. The air that rushed into the cab wasn't air. It was a vacuum, a cold, breathless absence that sucked the heat right out of my lungs. The tall man stood on the running board. He didn't climb up. He simply unfolded, his long, skeletal frame filling the doorway, blocking out the charcoal sky. Up close, his face was a landscape of horrors. Skin like parchment stretched over a skull that was too angular, too sharp. The empty sockets where his eyes should have been were not dark. They were deep, infinite tunnels that seemed to pull at the very fabric of my consciousness. "The toll is due," the tall man rasped. Miller turned to face him. The big trucker didn't scream. He didn't reach for the tire iron under his seat. He just looked tired. "Is Davin here?" Miller asked, his voice cracking like a child's. "He is waiting in the long hall," the tall man said. He extended a hand. The fingers were impossibly long, the nails black and curved like obsidian hooks. Miller nodded slowly. Okay. He took the tall man's hand. The change was instant. It started at Miller's fingertips, a wave of matte black ink shooting up his arm, consuming the flannel, consuming the skin. Miller gasped, his back arching, his mouth opening in a silent O of shock. But it wasn't pain, it was erasure. The color drained from his face, his beard turned gray, then white, then transparent, and his eyes. I watched as the blue of Miller's irises dissolved, the white sclera flooded with darkness. In the span of a heartbeat, his eyes became two solid, unblinking voids. He turned his head slowly to look at me. His expression was gone, the fear, the grit, the humanity, wiped clean. "The ride is over," Miller said. His voice was no longer his own. It was the flat, multi-tonal chorus of the hive. "Get out," the tall man commanded, looking past Miller.
I didn't wait. I kicked my door open and threw myself out of the cab. I hit the ground hard. The dirt was gray, powdery, and cold as ash. It puffed up around me, smelling of ozone and stale attic air. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. I was in the lot. It stretched forever. In every direction, as far as the eye could see, were vehicles. Thousands of them, millions. There were 1950 sedans with chrome fins, rusted to husks. There were horse-drawn carriages rotting into the dust. There were modern SUVs, sleek and silent. There were semi-trucks like Miller's, lined up in precise military rows. And standing next to every single vehicle was a driver. They stood perfectly still, like statues in a graveyard. Men in fedoras, women in bonnets, teenagers in hoodies, truckers in vests. They were all gray. They all stared straight ahead, and they all had black eyes. The silence was absolute. No wind, no engines, just the pressure of a million watching eyes. I backed away from Miller's truck. The tall man had stepped down onto the dirt. Miller stood beside him now, just another gray statue in the collection. "Where are you going?" the tall man asked. His voice didn't carry through the air. It resonated in the bones of my inner ear. "You have a parking spot assigned." I turned and ran. I ran blindly through the rows of dead cars. My boots kicked up clouds of gray dust. I passed a family station wagon from the 70s. A mother and father stood by the doors, gray and silent. In the back seat, two black-eyed children watched me pass, their heads turning in unison like owls. This is where they come from, I realized with a sick, lurching horror. This isn't hell. It's a depot, a storage facility. I needed a weapon. I needed a way out. But the geometry of the lot was wrong. I ran for what felt like miles, but the horizon never got closer. The rows of cars just repeated, an endless loop of chrome and rust. Then I saw it, parked in a wide, empty circle of dirt. My sedan. The one I had burned at the school. The one I had abandoned. It was pristine. The paint shone with a dull gray luster. The windows were intact. And leaning against the driver's side door was me. I skidded to a halt, my boots sliding in the dust. The figure was identical to me in every way. Same jeans, same jacket, same height, same messy hair. But his skin was the color of old newspaper, and he wasn't breathing.
He looked up as I approached. The black eyes locked onto mine. "You're late," the Grammy said. His voice was my voice, but stripped of all soul. It sounded like a recording played over a dead phone line. "What are you?" I whispered, backing away. "I am the vessel," the Grammy said. He pushed off the car and took a step toward me. He moved with that same gliding, unnatural smoothness the children had. "I am the part of you that gave up when you heard the knock." "I didn't give up," I snarled, clenching my fists. "I'm still here." "Are you?" The Grammy pointed at my right hand. I looked down. The black infection I thought had been cured by the sunrise. It was back. And it was worse. It wasn't just my skin anymore. My hand was translucent, turning into gray mist. I could see the bones of my fingers turning into black glass. "You crossed the threshold," the Grammy said. "You listened to the voicemail. You entered the house. You rode in the truck. You are full of static." He held out his hand. "Give me the keys." "What keys?" I stammered. "The keys to the meat," the Grammy said. "You are tired. You want to sleep. You want the fear to stop. Give me the keys and you can rest here. I will take the wheel." "No!" I swung at him, a desperate, wild haymaker with my good left hand. My fist passed straight through his head. He was smoke. He was shadow. The Grammy laughed. It was a dry, rustling sound. "You can't hurt the echo," he whispered. He reached out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was solid iron. The cold was instantaneous, paralyzing my entire arm. "The exchange is mandatory." I struggled, kicking and thrashing, but he held me effortlessly. He began to pull me toward the open door of the sedan. "Let go," I screamed. "Look," the Grammy said, nodding toward the horizon. I looked. The rows of cars were parting. Walking down the center of the aisle was the tall man, and behind him, holding hands, skipping in the gray dust, were the two children from the mountain pass. They were singing, a low, discordant hum that vibrated in my teeth. "The wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round. The exchange is mandatory," the Grammy said. "You have to choose, driver. Sit in the car and become one of us, or stay out here with him." He gestured to the tall man. The tall man stopped 10 feet away. He loomed over us, blocking out the non-existent sky. He reached into his duster and pulled out a jar.
A mason jar with a lid. Inside, a tiny, terrified ball of light bounced against the glass. "The car is safe," the tall man rasped. "The car is quiet. The jar is forever." He unscrewed the lid. The sound of the vacuum seal popping echoed like a gunshot. "Choose," the Grammy whispered, tightening his grip on my wrist. "The seat or the jar?" I looked at the car. The interior looked comfortable, peaceful, a place where I could close my eyes and never open them again. I looked at the jar, the eternal, suffocating trap. I looked at the tall man. And then I looked at the multi-tool still clipped to my belt. the one thing that was real, the one thing that was metal and sharp and mine. I didn't choose the car. I didn't choose the jar. I chose the only thing left. I ripped the multi-tool free, flipped out the blade, and drove it not into the Grammy and not into the tall man. I drove it into the side of my own neck. Not to kill, to wake up. Pain. Sharp, hot, blinding red pain. The gray world flickered. The static screamed. No, the tall man roared, dropping the jar. The Grammy shrieked, his face distorting into a pixelated blur. Pain was the anchor. Pain was the one thing they couldn't replicate. I twisted the blade. The gray dust exploded. The cars dissolved into mist. I was falling through the floor of the world. And as I fell, I heard the children screaming, not in anger, but in hunger. He's waking up! He's waking up!
Chapter 10: The Passenger. Gasps. That was the first sensation. Not pain, not cold, but the violent, desperate intake of oxygen. My eyes snapped open. I wasn't falling through a gray void. I wasn't standing in a parking lot of dead souls. I was sitting in the driver's seat of my sedan. The engine was ticking. Tick, tick, tick. The air was still. The silence was heavy. I scrambled upright, my hands flying to my neck. I expected blood. I expected a gaping wound where I had driven the multi-tool into my own flesh. Smooth skin, no blood, no hole. I checked my right hand. It was pale, shaking, but it wasn't black. The necrosis was gone. The frostbite was gone. I looked at the dashboard clock, 03:05 a.m. I stared at the red digits, my breath hitching in my throat. 5 minutes. I had closed my eyes for 5 minutes. The mountain turnout was exactly as it had been. The fog pressed against the glass, a wall of white cotton. The pines were silent sentinels. A dream, I whispered. The sound of my own voice was weak, trembling. It was just a nightmare, sleep paralysis. I laughed. It was a wet, hysterical sound that died quickly in the cold cab. I fumbled for the keys in the ignition. I needed to leave. I needed to get off this mountain, find a motel with bright lights and thin walls, and sleep for a week. I twisted the key. The engine roared to life. The headlights cut through the fog, illuminating nothing, just gravel and mist. No children, no tall man, no gray houses. I threw the car into reverse, tires spitting gravel as I backed out onto the highway. I didn't care about the speed limit. I didn't care about the curves. I drove like a man escaping hell. The miles rolled by. The fog thinned. The sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. I reached the first town, a small cluster of gas stations and diners clinging to the interstate. I pulled into a brightly lit service station. I needed coffee. I needed to see people. I parked at the pump and killed the engine. I sat there for a moment, letting the vibration of the road fade from my bones. I was safe. I was out. I opened the door and stepped out. The morning air was crisp and smelled of gasoline and sagebrush.
I walked toward the convenience store. My reflection caught in the glass door as I approached. Disheveled hair, dark circles under my eyes. A man who had driven too far and slept too little. But just a man.
I bought a large black coffee and a bottle of water. The clerk was a bored teenager who didn't look up from his phone. "Rough night," he mumbled as I paid. "You have no idea," I said. I walked back to the car. I felt lighter. The terror of the lot, the weight of the tall man's gaze, it was fading, retreating into the subconscious like a bad fever dream. I reached for the door handle of my car, and then I stopped. Parked at the pump next to mine was a station wagon, loaded with luggage, a family car. In the driver's seat, a man was sleeping. His head was tipped back against the headrest, mouth slightly open. He looked exhausted. In the back seat, 2 kids were asleep. I stared at them. A strange sensation rippled through my right arm, a phantom cold, a memory of ice. My legs moved. I didn't tell them to move. I wanted to get in my car. I wanted to drive away. But my boots crunched on the concrete, walking away from my sedan, walking toward the station wagon. "Stop," I thought. "What are you doing?" My body didn't listen. It felt distant, like I was operating a remote-controlled vehicle with a laggy connection. I walked around the back of the station wagon. I approached the passenger side window. The man was still asleep. The window was rolled up. I stood there. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, my real heart, the one trapped inside the cage of ribs. But my hands felt calm. I watched my right hand raise up. I tried to scream. I tried to bite my tongue. I tried to throw myself backward. Nothing happened. I was a passenger in my own skull. My hand formed a loose fist. Knock, knock, soft, controlled. The sound was deafening to me, but quiet to the world. The man in the driver's seat stirred. He blinked, looking confused. He turned his head toward the window. He saw me standing there, a normal guy in a jacket. He rolled the window down an inch. "Yeah, can I help you?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. I tried to say, "Run, drive away, don't listen to me." But my jaw unhinged, my vocal cords tightened, and a voice that was not mine, a voice that sounded like dry leaves and grinding stones, spoke for me. "Sir, can we borrow your phone? We're lost." The man frowned. "We?" He looked around. There was no one else standing there, just me. "Me and the others," my voice said. It wasn't just my voice anymore. Underlying the words was a high, harmonic frequency, the sound of children whispering. The man looked unsettled.
"We are very cold," I said. "We just need to come inside for a minute." The man's hand moved to the gear shift. His instinct was kicking in, the survival fear. "Look, buddy, I'm going to go," he said, reaching for the window switch. I leaned closer. My head tilted at an unnatural angle. I felt the muscles in my neck snap, but there was no pain. "Let us in," I whispered. The man looked at my face. He looked into my eyes, and in the reflection of his widening pupils, I saw what I had become. My eyes weren't brown anymore. The whites were gone. The irises were gone. They were 2 pools of matte, absorbing darkness, 2 holes in the universe where a soul used to be. The gray me hadn't lost in the lot. The gray me hadn't been killed by the multi-tool. The multi-tool had killed me, the resistance, the part of the mind that fought back. I hadn't woken up. I had been evicted. I was just the ghost haunting the machine now. The man in the car screamed. He slammed on the gas. The station wagon peeled out of the lot, tires screeching. My body watched him go. It didn't chase. It just stood there, staring until the car disappeared onto the highway. "He ran," the child's voice in my head giggled.
He will stop again, the tall man's voice rumbled in my chest. They always stop. My body turned. It walked back to my sedan. It got in. It started the engine. I wasn't driving home. I checked the GPS. It wasn't set to my apartment. It was set to a coordinate, a remote stretch of highway in Nevada, a place with no lights and long shadows. My hand reached for the radio. It turned the dial to a static station. My lips peeled back in a smile I didn't feel. "We have a lot of miles to cover," I said to the empty car. And the empty car whispered back, "Let us in."